if we look at what the people's needs are, what have been the needs of the people in the new city that you are building in the northeast of Zambia, in terms of planning, in terms of land use also. So how did you also build on these needs from the ground?
Yeah, cities have a way of evolving and regenerating themselves depending on how you plan them. And they reshape themselves as the circumstances come on. So the best way to look at it is look at the three major drivers of developing a new city. The technical services. Is the sewer, water supply, waste management, and that in place? And that will be dictated by the nature of economic activity in that area. The second thing that you would need to look at, the civic services that are required in there. Do you have schools, hospitals, and places of worship, and all those provided for in that area? The third is the commercial activities in the area to support the growth of the city. Our typical example on what was happening is during project phase, the major needs of the town were totally different from what we have now during operation phase of the mine. During that time, most of the people were there because they have a job in the mine, and they were being fed by the mine in camps. So at that stage, the major emphasis is to do the residential development for the people to be in there. And most of the people that were there were mobile and migrant people who are maintaining two homes in different places. So the type of housing units you start with is to cover the type of population you have at that moment. As we've gone now into operational phase, people have now started bringing in their families. So because now the families are now coming and joining them in the new town, the need to expand on educational infrastructure, health infrastructure, other social infrastructure for recreation becomes paramount. And then again, the type of commercial activities has changed. We had small container shops at that time. Now we've got big supermarkets because now the population is coming through. So over time, then you discover that towns tend to regenerate themselves if you support them properly. I know we've got an advantage of the support of big mining conglomerate. So resources haven't been a major issue. Unlike if you're working in the public sector. I know those who have worked in the public sector would agree that some of the best town plans are made in the public sector. 10% of that is ending up implemented. And this is as a result of resource restrictions. And so those are some of the things that you need to look at. So you have to measure the plans you've made with the pace that you have in the pocket. Leaving it open for expansion and implementation of other things. And it's time that we now move to planning around people rather than planning, for the purpose of doing it. I know most of the old towns were planned, for example, around vehicles and not around the mobility of the people. You find that there are very nice highways and all this. There are no cycle tracks, there are no walkways and all those things. So that's one of the things that we've tried to address, that we plan around people, not around other infrastructure. And protection of nature is also another thing that you need to look at, and it's one of those design principles that we've looked at.
Yeah, so there's clearly a people-centered approach. I'm now going back also to our designers and architects. So with which resource constraints are you confronted? Leander, for example, we were discussing yesterday again, I like this idea of you designers puzzling dreams into space. So how do you do this when space is limited and when resources are limited?
Yeah, it's actually an interesting question. I mean, when we talk about urban planning and architecture, we talk in challenges. previously, we had like the talk about digital world, and we talk in opportunities. And I think as planners, especially in a context which is challenging, we should like take that same approach. We should look into what are the opportunities. And we, of course, come from an age where in the 19th century we used steel, then we used concrete. And throughout like the institutions now, there is kind of consensus that timber will be the next material for the 21st century. So why should we not like take that up and kind of leapfrog? I heard the frontier of technology in these talks before. Why can we not do the same in construction? And I think this is like the approach we are taking on architecture is first of all, see, what are the opportunities? We have abundance of timber available in Africa. It grows twice as fast as the rest of the world. So, and it's more healthy to live in a timber environment. The other big advantage of timber is that we can build modular systems with it. And that comes back to how can we then engage as architects with constraints we have here, is that we can use prefabrication, we can use modular systems to create buildings which are able to allow for different infills, for small studios up to big apartments, and we can be very flexible on how we arrange them in the town. And I think that is like also relating to some other issues which were raised. How can the town be flexible enough and grow over time with the needs, with the population, with changing requirements, demands of the population? I think we have to rethink also architecture and the way we construct. And we have a great opportunity because we have a fantastic demand here in Africa coming at us. So we need to serve that demand. Why would we do that with old conventional methods when we have like the opportunity to reinvent like how we built in Africa and then also export that to the rest of the world?
Yeah, it's about reinvention, about adaptation. Luke, from your experience, we talked yesterday again about the gaps between objectives and then the actual implementation, which is also, I guess, linked depending on the context of resource constraints, for instance. So from your experience in Ghana and Malawi, how did you overcome this challenge of the gap between objectives and implementation?
I think it's. I'd love also to make the point of okay, I want to link it to the low income thing, and maybe on a more infrastructural level. So what we often see is that the low income countries, they often have basic infrastructure, so energy, transport, communication, and so on, and minimal governance capabilities to enforce and legislate the planning process. And so I think that designers and developers, they really should be very precise in identifying the interventions they want to make that the extreme effort of the financing and governmental partners that it's worth of doing it. So with limited resources comes greater responsibility. And at ORG, we try always to engage our clients that to make the case for multi-purpose infrastructure. And I think this has several advantages. So projects should be cross-sectoral, so that we creating opportunities that cut across social classes and economic sectors. So it's the idea that every dollar that is spent is not just addressing one type of your program of one social class or one economy or whatever. We try to see it broader, and I think it's also very important if you do that effort and you engage external financement that to lower the risk of that financement. So if you have a very nice project for thousands and thousands of houses, okay, if it doesn't work out that way, it should be that your designing is more resilient in a way that the infrastructural cost that you make that can serve several audiences in effect.
Yeah, resilience is key, and I think that's also something you mentioned earlier, Tony, that this is one of the values to make a project successful. So what are the challenges that you have met? Has your Gensler been resilient?
Yes, projects have to be resilient, right? They have to be able to evolve in a dynamic way. When we're talking about low income, right, oftentimes planning and actually thinking out solutions isn't the priority. It's about putting out the fire, right? It's about dealing with the issue. And we miss identifying the real issue. So that's why, Patrick, I said vision, right? It's identify what we are solving for and getting the right stakeholders and listening to them and being able to craft certain, I think I was talking to Mark yesterday and we were talking about loose guide rails to help them kind of find a path to a solution. And then by the time they get to the solution, there's another issue to deal with, right? So it's being able to always be agile in one's proffering of real solutions. And that's what defines what resilience really means. And, you know, the best, we all went to architecture school and we studied Brasilia and we studied all the great cities in the world. And when we go back there now, they haven't quite, the outcome isn't what we thought or the designers expected it to be. But that doesn't mean it wasn't successful. Mm-hmm. So then what does successful actually mean? And I think that's the debate that we currently have to have, and we should be open to unexpected solutions, because you know the issue of housing, low income, catering to the low income society is a complex problem.
Right. I think something that you all share in your different projects, and again from a different professional perspectives, is the value of sustainability. This is what is quite striking. And another point is that what has been mentioned throughout the conference is also Africa as a place of innovation, Africa cities as a place of innovation. And it's been promoted that local knowledge should also be taken into consideration when planning sustainable architecture, designing and city projects. So yeah, in this last round of questions before we close, I would like to know from all of you, what are your approaches actually to take into account the local knowledge, local potential for innovation? Maybe Leander, you are also promoting a sustainable approach using timber as construction material. How does this fit into also construction techniques, for example, in the environments of Fumba Town? How do you deal with that?
I think I want to make it a bit broader because we are talking about infrastructure, and it's actually a good one. Also, of course, in Zanzibar, we have a very specific setting. We are an island, so we have very limited car ownership. Nevertheless, when we took over the master planning, we basically got an engineered master plan, which was defined by roads. So the first thing we did was redesign the master plan, basically cutting out half of the roads, replacing it by green to create better solutions for stormwater, to create more green space, which then also elevated like the pricing of the houses, because everybody would prefer to live on a green park than on a road. So through that simple design measures, like which were really like located on the specific context of Zanzibar, knowing we would not end up in the same car ownership, we could make the city a lot more green. And I think what African cities sets apart is that we have space here in Africa. We have a lot of greenery. We have fantastic climates, and this we should cherish when we set up our cities. we should not make the mistake that we go into a city structure where we rely on commuting. Of course, there are cities where that already is the case, but when we are now re-engineering and re-envisioning African cities, we should like take those local principles of an open, green, and nice city to live in as the starting point, and not make the same mistake as other cities in the world have made.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and Tony, I also know that for Gensler, sustainability is key, and human relationships, interaction with people. So how do you implement that value?
Yeah. So we implement it by learning, right? It's and evolving. It's as Nigerian, I grew up in Nigeria, right? And when I work in the United States now, and when I go around town and I see how our music, Afrobeat in West Africa, Amapiano in the South, has evolved and has become mainstream. Now, I think if, say, 10 years or 15 years ago or 20 years ago, would those practitioners be able to have gotten into Juilliard School of Music? You know, but Juilliard is now learning from them. They are now adapting those beats, those rhythms. If we kind of apply that anecdote to design and planning, there's a lot to learn from Africa. There's a lot we can learn from it. People inhabited this continent, right? And if you look at if there was a way to measure the carbon footprint before this urban kind of urbanity started happening, right? We can learn from that. We can learn from the mistakes of the West. We can learn from the mistakes of larger cities. And that's what we try to do in tracking, measuring, monitoring our global warming potentials, our material use. What are the things that were harmful that we can say, okay, how did you do it 20, 30 years ago? How does that work? It actually is beautiful. And that's what we should start learning to adapt and scale. Because, speed is also essential, sorry.
Right. And for you, Michael, I also know that environment and the green aspect is very huge for Kolombila Town development. You've shared earlier how the New City project has been also now owned by inhabitants. So what is the role of sustainability and environment in that process?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we adopted and that we learned from during the development is that in Africa people are used to living in communities, and so what by design, if you look at the layout of the area, we have very short streets with houses that are in there, so that almost everyone who living in that street, they know everyone on that street. And with short fences, most of them are green fences, and we discourage the construction of boundaries. I know most of the people think these are for security. What the boundary walls actually do is they don't protect you; they protect the criminals when they get it. If boundary walls were a sign of security, I tell people Johannesburg probably would be the safest. But it has the highest boundary walls, and it's not the safest city that you can actually look at. And so we tried as much as possible. Over time, we're now designing and building better than we did in the initial phases, because then we realized that some of the initial houses that we had, for example, had open plan arrangements between living areas and very small verandas, and then we learned that they were not very popular. Because the way of life of most of the Africans or Zambians per se, they wouldn't want to be sitting in the kitchen cooking while the visitors are in the lounge looking at them. So we tried and redesigned most of these areas, and we tried to also increase the outdoor spaces for that. And we built these nice big houses in the first phase. Then later on, we realized that, people living in there will have nannies and will have gardeners. Where are they going to be living? So we had to create smaller plots with smaller footprint of housing. to cater for that income group. And those are some of the things and the challenges that we've had. And at the moment, we're grappling with the issue of sustainability, of the longevity of the town, because it's still strongly linked to mining operations. And the question third-party investors always ask, what's the life of mine that is remaining? And then they will have to decide, do I invest so much money if the mine will end up? So that's the reason why we're developing the industrial area that can do agro-processing and all these other activities that are striving away from mining operations, so that even at the end of life of mine, life would go. We anticipate at the end of life there will be a dip. But if we do all the commercial activities properly, the town will regenerate itself. I don't know who remembers that Johannesburg was a mining town. You only realize that Johannesburg was a mining town when you see some of the touristic structures that we have. You have towns which were originally as fishing towns or fishing camps, which over time very little fishing is happening. And now you see. So I think these are some of the things that we're grappling it to attain sustainability in the town.
I didn't know that Joburg was a mining town.
Yeah.
Luke, for your work, I know you're currently working on a university project in Malawi. So which role does sustainability play here, and how does it also inform maybe your broader work on secondary cities?
Yeah. In fact, we saw a lot of examples also today where and that's something also that Leander was saying, that infrastructure. It's a lot of projects that we are doing now is demineralization of the thing, and that has not only to do with cost saving. It has not only to do with reduce of car necessity, so other you be more multimodal, but it is also to do with what is the place that we give in our new cities to nature, really, to become resilient and to become climate adaptive. And so sustainability should not be only embedded in how projects are located and how they are designed, in our opinion, but it is configured to facilitate social mobility and environmental stewardship, in our opinion. And this environmental stewardship should be covered by local communities. So that was also one part of your question. And we think that in our design of new cities, we must ensure to create large green spaces, so that this landscape approach built by nature, which is extremely important, I think. And those green spaces shouldn't be only green. It is not about just a creative thing, or what Leander was saying, and that's an added value, that you can have a more attractive value to the property. But we should think about how those green spaces can become real economic and social programs that could be associated with. And I think it's also important that we never assume that enforcement and legislation would be accountable for that. No, let's try a bottom-up sustainability, and it's according to us the only viable strategy for large-scale transformative visions. For example, we did. It's then North Saharan Africa. If I may give this example, in Egypt we had this huge transformative project in the north of the Sinai. It was Lake Bardaville, which was a massive reconfiguration of natural resources by a complete regreening of a part of the Sinai desert, and so improving resilience and climate adaptation on a regional scale. But this was of course in a way that we were desalting the Bardaville Lake, And it came by an industrial development, creating new harbor, creating urban growth on a massive scale. So while we combine this all together, why the large green spaces become very a social aspect of your program.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know time is up, but we're the last panel, so I would like to give the last word to Patrick, and also know from his experience, how communities were involved in the flexible city approach, for example, and your other planning experiences to make projects sustainable.
Thank you. So I think of this, I have two experiences that really come to mind. The biggest one is the work that I've done in Ethiopia, Uganda, and Somaliland. And this was the project was about creating planned city extensions in fast-growing secondary cities. And the basic idea was, look, all these cities have master plans. The master plans are sitting on a shelf in the mayor's office. They have no relationship to the way the town is actually developing. They were mainly designed by outside consultants that have no reference to the available resources or implementation capacity. So what's happening in practice in these cities is that they're growing with no planning at all. Or a positive way of framing that is to say, absent the public sector, people are building the city on their own, right? But we know that this comes with a lot of negative externalities. For instance, it's very expensive to put infrastructure in, 3 to 7 times as expensive to provide basic services in unplanned areas versus areas that were laid out before they were developed. So we came in with a program that taught the local planners to make much simpler, implementable plans on the urban periphery. And it essentially consisted of a program to put road rights-of-ways in place and nothing else. Not regulating land uses, not doing neighborhood-level street design, not parcelizing the land, because we know that those are things where if you don't do it, the private sector will. But the private sector won't put in corridors for arterial infrastructure. And that's what you really need to have an integrated economy, to provide basic services at reasonable costs. The thing is, we trained them how to make these plans. It took about 3 days to train them and make the plans because it's very, very simple work. But there was still the challenge of implementation. And in the end, actually making these plans a reality on the ground was only possible through close collaboration with the people whose parcels would be affected. So what ended up happening was each municipality set up a team from the municipality, right? It's not me going into the field and talking to landowners, and negotiated with individual landowners the best route for the road to cross their property. And you would think that this would be a really burdensome and onerous process, but once people saw the advantage of having that infrastructure, which was very easy, I mean, everybody wants a road on their property. Not only did they want the road to succeed, they actually wanted it to happen faster. So they helped identify the best routes, they helped negotiate with their neighbors, and the whole project developed on a consensus basis. And what should have been obvious at the beginning, but which we all realized in the end, is incorporating the local knowledge that actually made it possible for the plans to be implemented also made the plans much better than what we would have come up with on our own, because they knew the details of their landscape, they knew the details of their neighbors' holdings, they knew who had 8 kids and couldn't afford to lose 15% of their land versus the old couple who's perfectly happy to lose it as long as the road comes in over a certain period of time. And so now, having done that, I try to bring that philosophy to all the projects that I do, which is for implementation, the people who hold the land now and who are on the ground are the partners in the implementation process. And that has to include meaningful feedback in the design, not just doing charrettes or having community consultations, but actually every meeting you have with a community member has to have the potential to lead to major meaningful changes in the design. Otherwise, it's not real community engagement. And in the end, you get a better project, cheaper to implement, more effective, more responsive to the landscape. So that's how I've tried to approach that in my work.
Yeah, building from the ground and based on local knowledge to achieve large-scale results. I think that's a nice conclusion of this very rich panel. Thank you so much. Thank you for your patience. And I think our speakers deserve an applause.